I can still remember the day my son looked me straight in the eyes and said words I never thought I'd hear from him. "I don't want to talk to you anymore." It was like someone had pulled the ground out from under me, a sentence so short, yet it cut deeper than anything I had ever felt. Deeper than anger, deeper than disappointment. It was rejection, pure and simple. And the most painful part? I knew right in that moment that it was my fault. I couldn't blame work. I couldn't blame stress. I couldn't blame that's just how kids are. Number. This one was on me. And here's the truth. It didn't happen in one explosive moment. It wasn't because of some big fight or a punishment I gave or a harsh word said in anger. No. It was something worse, something slower. It was the kind of mistake that creeps into your life quietly, day by day, until one day you look up and realize the little boy who used to run into your arms doesn't run to you anymore, because you've become a stranger in your own child's life. That's the story I need to tell you, the story of the biggest mistake I've ever made as a father, and why, even now, years later, the regret still lingers in my chest. It began on what seemed like just another ordinary day. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. I came home from work late, shoulders heavy, head pounding, carrying all the weight of the office on my back. Deadlines, emails, phone calls, the usual. I pushed open the door, hoping only for a moment of silence. And then, there he was. My son, running toward me, eyes glowing with pride, hands clutching a piece of paper like it was treasure. "Dad, look what I made!" I can still see his face. That look of pure excitement children have when they believe they're about to make you proud. He held up the paper, waiting for me to notice every line, every color, every detail. It was just a drawing, a simple, innocent drawing. But to him, it was everything. And to me, in that moment, it was nothing, because my head was pounding, because my phone was buzzing in my pocket, because I was too wrapped up in my own noise to see what mattered. So I did what so many tired fathers do without even thinking. I brushed him off. I said the words that still haunt me today. "Not now. I'm busy. Go show your mom I didn't mean it to be cruel. I didn't mean to wound him." In my head, it was just a tired dad asking for a little quiet. But that's not how he heard it. Number. To him, it was rejection. That night at dinner, I noticed it. He didn't try to tell me about his day. He just sat quietly, staring at his plate. And in the days that followed, the change grew clearer. He stopped running to me with his stories. He stopped asking me to play. He stopped looking for me first. Instead, he went to his mom. Always. And me? I told myself I was the victim, that he was pulling away for no reason, that he was the one shutting me out. One afternoon at work, I actually found myself hiding in the bathroom, scrolling my phone, typing into Google, "How to be a good dad for beginners." Yeah, that was me. Like some desperate man trying to download Fatherhood the same way you download instructions for fixing a broken microwave. But no article, no list of tips, no motivational quote could erase the look on my son's face when he realized I wasn't really there for him. Because the truth was staring me in the eye. It wasn't him pulling away, it was me. And the silence between us? It wasn't angry, it wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was empty. I would come home, drop my keys on the counter, waiting for that familiar sound, the sound of little feet running to greet me. But instead, nothing. Sometimes I'd catch him in the living room, laughing with his mom. But the moment I walked in, the smile would fade, the laughter would stop, and I'd feel it. That quiet, invisible push, like I no longer belonged in his world. And you know what? I deserved it. But back then, I couldn't see it. I didn't have the courage to face what I had done. So instead, I got angry. Not at myself, at him. I thought, why is he ignoring me? Why does he always go to her? Why won't he try harder with me? It sounds pathetic now, but the truth is, I acted like a jealous child. I wanted his love, his attention, his trust, without actually showing up for him. One night, he was sitting on the floor building a Lego tower. I wanted to break the ice, so I threw out a joke. "Hey, that tower looks like it's about to collapse faster than my paycheck." I expected him to laugh, or at least look up, but he didn't. He just kept building, brick after brick, silent. And that silence? It hit me harder than any argument ever could. It was the sound of a wall I had built myself. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the realization finally started to creep in. Kids don't just stop talking to their dads out of nowhere. They stop when they don't feel safe. And safe doesn't mean toys. It doesn't mean money. It doesn't even mean a roof over their head. Safe means feeling heard. And the truth was undeniable. I wasn't listening. The distance between us kept growing, like a rope slipping slowly through my hands. I'd ask him questions. "How was school?" "Fine." "What are you working on?" "Nothing." It wasn't just short answers. It was a wall I had built, brick by brick. And then came the breaking point. One evening, I overheard him in the kitchen. He was whispering to his mom about a problem at school. Some kids had been teasing him. He was hurting, he was struggling, and it didn't even cross his mind to come to me. I stood there in the hallway, frozen, listening to the sound of his small, fragile voice, and it felt like a punch straight to the chest. I wasn't his safe place anymore. I wasn't even an option. But the moment that truly broke me came a week later. I tried to start a conversation. He just shook his head, and then he looked at me and said the words that shattered me. "Dad, when I talk to you, it feels like you're somewhere else." I'll never forget that. Because he was right. I was always somewhere else. At work, on my phone, lost in my own head, anywhere, but with him. And in that moment, I felt something inside me break. I wasn't just failing as a father. I was losing him. My worst mistake wasn't shouting. It wasn't losing my temper. It wasn't being too strict, number. It was something colder, quieter, more dangerous. My worst mistake was making my son believe that his words didn't matter, that his voice carried no weight, that he was invisible. After that night, his words haunted me. They echoed everywhere. At work, in the car, in the middle of the night, when the house was silent. "Dad, it feels like you're somewhere else." I'd close my eyes and hear it again. Not angry, not loud, just calm and distant. Like he had already accepted the truth. His dad was never really there. The guilt began to eat me alive. I replayed every little moment. Every time I brushed him off. Every time I pretended to listen. Every time I chose my phone, or my stress, or my fatigue, over him. And then came the thought that nearly broke me. It wasn't just that I was failing him now. I was training him for the future. Training him to believe that men don't listen, that fathers are absent, that love means silence. And that thought terrified me. One night, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet, everyone else asleep. I whispered to myself words I never thought I'd admit out loud. I just want to disappear. Because in that moment, disappearing felt easier than facing the truth, easier than facing the wreckage I had created. I wasn't just ashamed. I was scared that it was already too late. But sitting there in the dark, I finally admitted what I had been running from. My son didn't need a perfect dad. He didn't need a father with all the answers. He didn't need a man who never made mistakes. He needed me, present, listening, trying. And that was exactly what I hadn't been. That night, I made a promise. I couldn't erase the past. I couldn't undo the pain. But maybe, just maybe, I could still change the future. I told myself, you won't fix this overnight. but you can start by showing up. And so, the next day, I did something small, something that felt harder than any lecture or apology. I walked into his room. He was sitting on the floor, sketching in a notebook. I froze in the doorway, uncertain, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Finally, I sat down beside him. "Hey, what are you drawing?" He looked at me once, then back at the paper. "Nothing. Just one word. Flat. Distant." But this time, I didn't leave. We sat there in silence, minute after minute, the kind of silence that used to make me restless, used to drive me back to my phone. But not this time. This time, I stayed. I fought the urge to fill the silence, to walk away, to distract myself. Instead, I just sat there, present. And then, slowly, something happened. He slid the notebook a little closer to me, almost like an invitation. On the page was a sketch of a dragon. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive, full of imagination, fire, detail. I smiled and said softly, "That's incredible. I never could have drawn something like that." For the first time in weeks, he looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it, a flicker, small, fragile, but real, trust. That night, I learned something I'll never forget. Rebuilding trust doesn't start with a big speech. It doesn't start with a dramatic gesture. Sometimes, it starts with silence, with staying, with proving, moment by moment, that you won't walk away again. After that night, with the dragon drawing, I made myself a promise, not a dramatic one, not a, from now on, everything will be different kind of promise. Number. It was quieter than that, simpler. I promised myself, just try again. Every day. Show up, even if it's awkward, even if it hurts, even if he doesn't want you there. And so the next day, I did. I found him sitting on the floor again, surrounded by Legos. He didn't look up when I came in, didn't rush to share what he was building, just kept stacking pieces, lost in his own world. I sat down beside him. No speeches, no demands, just silence. After a while, I asked a small question, something simple. "Is that a spaceship?" He shrugged, didn't answer at first, but I stayed. I didn't walk away. Little by little, he started letting me in, not all at once, not with excitement, but with tiny, careful steps. A word here, a glance there, a brick handed to me without looking. It wasn't much, but it was something, and after weeks of silence, that something felt like the world. A week later, we had our first real conversation in months. It didn't start with anything deep or emotional. No confessions, no, "I forgive you, Dad." It started with a question only a kid could ask. "Dad, do you think dragons would beat dinosaurs in a fight?" I froze for a second and then I laughed, partly out of relief. Partly because it was such a perfectly ridiculous, wonderfully innocent question. And I answered him like it was the most important debate in the world, because to me, in that moment, it was. For 10 whole minutes, we argued about dragons versus dinosaurs. He defended the T-Rex with fire in his eyes. I fought for the dragon, talking about wings, fire, strategy. Back and forth, neither one of us giving in. It was silly. It was nonsense. But it was us. And sitting there, arguing about imaginary battles, I realized how much I had missed this. Not the topic, not the debate, but him. The spark in his eyes, the sound of his voice, the way he leaned into me like I mattered again. That silly fight, dragons versus dinosaurs, meant more to me than any serious conversation I'd had in years. Because it was proof that the wall between us was starting to crack. But I'd be lying if I told you that everything magically changed after that. It didn't. Life isn't a movie where one moment fixes it all. There were days he still shut me out. Days when I'd sit beside him trying to connect, and he'd roll his eyes, or give me one-word answers, or worse, no answer at all. And I'll be honest, sometimes I wanted to quit. Sometimes I wanted to throw up my hands and say, well, at least I tried. At least I made the effort. But then I'd remember his words, that sentence that pierced me deeper than any argument ever could. Dad, when I talk to you, it feels like you're somewhere else. And every time I heard that echo in my head, I stayed, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was boring, even when it felt like he didn't want me there. Because I knew what would happen if I left again, if I gave up again. The wall would come back, and this time, it might never come down. So I stayed, and little by little, I began to see it. The cracks in that wall, tiny openings where the light slipped through. He'd show me a drawing. Nothing dramatic, just a sketch pushed across the table. But to me, it was everything. He'd tell me a joke, silly, nonsensical, the kind of joke only kids think is funny. But when I laughed, really laughed, I saw something soften in his eyes. Sometimes he'd simply say, "Dad, play with me." Just 5 minutes. And every time, no matter how tired I was, no matter how much work was waiting, I dropped what I was doing, and I gave him those 5 minutes. Because I had learned the hardest truth of fatherhood. If you don't make time for your child, one day your child will stop making time for you. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But slowly, piece by piece, I was earning my way back into his world. It happened on a night that was supposed to be ordinary. No birthday, no holiday, just a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, making myself a sandwich. And then I heard it. His voice. "Dad, can I tell you something?" 5 simple words. But to me, they hit harder than any punch. Because it had been months since my son had come to me first. I froze, bread still in my hands, afraid to even breathe, like I might scare the moment away. He sat down at the table, his eyes fixed on the floor, his voice quiet, careful, and then he told me about a kid at school, a bully, someone who had been making his days miserable. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about playground teasing. This was about trust. This was about him risking, one more time, to let me in, testing if his dad could finally be the safe place again. So I listened, every single word. Not half listening while scrolling my phone, not nodding while thinking about work, not distracted, not somewhere else. I listened like his words were the only thing in the world that mattered, because in that moment, they were. When he finished, there was silence, a heavy silence. I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of being dismissed, brushed off, rejected again. So I leaned in, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I'm proud of you for telling me, and I'm here. We'll figure this out together for a second." He just stared at me, testing me, measuring if I really meant it. And then he nodded, small, almost nothing. But to me, it was everything. That nod was his way of saying, "Okay, Dad, I'll give you another chance." I can't explain the wave that crashed over me in that moment. Relief, gratitude, and yes, sadness. Sadness for all the times I hadn't been there before. But above all, hope. Because maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. That night I learned something I'll never forget. Trust doesn't return in big speeches. It doesn't come from dramatic apologies. It returns in whispers, in nods, in quiet moments when your child risks being vulnerable again. And if you're lucky enough to be on the receiving end, you hold on to it with everything you've got. After that night at the kitchen table, things didn't suddenly turn perfect. We didn't become the picture of a flawless father and son. But something had changed. Something real. It was as if a door that had been locked for months had finally cracked open. And through that narrow crack, little moments began to slip back in. One evening, we were brushing our teeth side by side. I caught his eyes in the mirror and suddenly, he made a ridiculous face, foam spilling everywhere, cheeks puffed out, eyes crossed. I burst out laughing, Not a polite chuckle, not a forced smile, but a real laugh, the kind that shakes your chest. And for the first time in a long time, we laughed together. That sound, his laughter mixing with mine, was something I hadn't realized how much I missed. It felt like music, like home. From then on, we started building little routines. They weren't planned, they weren't perfect, but they mattered. He'd bring me his drawings, and instead of just nodding absent-mindedly, I'd ask questions. Why did you give the dragon red wings? What's the story behind this character? Sometimes his answers were silly. Sometimes they were surprisingly deep. But every time those little exchanges pulled us closer. And then came our debates. Not about school, not about chores, but about the things that mattered most to him. Dragons versus dinosaurs, superheroes versus aliens, ice cream versus pizza, summer versus winter. On the surface, they weren't important arguments, but to us, they were everything. Because those debates reminded me of something I had forgotten. Connection doesn't always come from big, heavy conversations. Sometimes it comes from laughing so hard your stomach hurts. Sometimes it comes from arguing about nonsense just for the joy of being together. And brick by brick, laugh by laugh, routine by routine, we were rebuilding what I thought I had lost. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in months, I felt it. That rope I thought had slipped from my hands was back. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that passes without notice. No special occasion, no plan. Just me on the couch, half reading a book, the house filled with the quiet hum of an ordinary weekend. And then I heard his voice from the hallway, steady, clear. "Dad, do you want to come with me?" For a moment, I froze, because those words, they were the exact opposite of the ones that had haunted me for months. Not, "I don't want to talk to you anymore," but an invitation, a bridge, a door creaking open again. I set the book down and followed him outside. In the backyard, he pointed proudly to a crooked little structure made from old scraps of wood and bent nails. To anyone else, it would have looked like a pile of junk. But to him, it was a treehouse, a castle, a dream. And to me, it was more than all of that. Because it wasn't about the wood or the nails or whether the thing would stand. It was about the fact that he wanted me there, beside him. He looked at me and said, "Maybe we can finish it together." Those words broke me and healed me all at once. They took me back to the silence, to the rejection, to that moment when he told me I was somewhere else. And now, here he was, asking me to be present again. My throat was tight, but I nodded. I picked up a hammer, held it in my hand like a lifeline, and said softly, "Yeah, let's do it." We spent the rest of the afternoon side by side, not talking much, not needing to. Sometimes connection doesn't live in the words. Sometimes it lives in the sound of nails being driven into wood, in the quiet laughter when a piece falls apart and you start again, in the simple act of building something, together. That day I realized something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a crooked little treehouse, built slowly, unevenly, one shaky step at a time. Looking back now, I know exactly what my worst mistake as a father was. It wasn't the moments I lost my temper. It wasn't the punishments that were too strict. It wasn't any of the classic dad mistakes people laugh about. My worst mistake was making my son feel invisible, making him believe that his words, his feelings, his little victories didn't matter enough for me to stop, to listen, to be present. That kind of wound cuts deeper than anger, because anger passes. It flares up, it burns, and then it fades. But silence? Silence lingers. It stays. It carves itself into the heart. And I still regret it. Even now, years later, My chest tightens when I think back to the moment he looked at me and said, "I don't want to talk to you anymore." But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. Regret is only poison if you let it stay inside you, if you let it rot. For me, regret became a teacher. It forced me to change. It forced me to show up. It forced me to never take his voice for granted again. Today, things are different. He talks to me. He laughs with me. He shares pieces of his world with me that I once thought were lost forever. And every single time he does, I remind myself, don't waste this moment. Don't drift away. Don't disappear again. Because second chances are never guaranteed. He once told me, "I don't want to talk to you anymore." Today, he says things like, "Dad, come with me." And those two sentences, they hold the entire story of my life as a father, failure, regret, and redemption. Maybe you've felt the same. Maybe you've lived your own version of this story. A moment when your child pulled away, when you realized you were too busy, too distracted, too far gone. So let me ask you, honestly, have you ever regretted missing the moment when your child needed you the most?